Hunters of Reddit, what did you see out there that made you not want to go back into the woods? My father and I were following a trail for a while, so we decided to take a break and catch our breaths. I sat on a log off the trail and my dad stood on the edge of the trail waiting for me to get up. I hear some movement and scan around and I see a man, dressed casually, walking quickly down the trail with a Glock in his hand. He is not really following the trail, he is just walking toward my dad with haste. Before he comes up to my dad, he asks if he's seen anything. Pretty normal. I keep an eye on him because I don't believe he was there to hunt. I think he was there to make sure my dad hadn't seen anything he wasn't supposed to. He wasn't dressed like a hunter, he didn't walk like a hunter, and it was deer season and he decided he would take his Glock out to get a deer. I wasn't buying, so I put around in the chamber and watched them talk. He seemed to be confident until my dad mentioned that he was here with me and gestured in my direction. I nodded and made a half-assed wave. And he seemed to lose interest in us and ended the conversation shortly after and turned around and walked back the way he came, just about as fast as he walked up to us. It worried us a bit but we continued on. We haven't been back to that area in a while. My dad told me that there have been drug busts near that area in the past. This isn't a supernatural tale, just an experience that made me not want to go back to that area. A long time ago my grandparents bought a small cabin in the woods in Pennsylvania. My dad, uncle, and aunt are all small children. My father told me the story. They're all sitting around outside with a small fire going when they hear branches breaking and footsteps coming from the darkness. They think it's a black bear because it's close but they can't see it. It seems to be going straight for my uncle, the littlest of the children. He starts panicking while everyone tells him not to move. Now this big black beast is within arm's reach of him and he's shaking like a leaf with his eyes closed. All of a sudden it opens its jaws and starts licking his face. Turns out that the next property over is owned by a couple who raise Newfoundland dogs and one got out. My family owns a couple hundred acres of forest in eastern NC. No one lives on the property anymore, and hasn't for the last 6 or 7 years. We went down there to do some target shooting in October of 2017, and I decided to go walk through the outskirts of the woods to locate a good limb for our range marker. As I'm walking, literally and proverbially kicking rocks, I come across a fairly nice, but practically brand new looking suitcase, full of clothes and other personal effects. No ID, nothing with any sort of identifying markers on them. But seemed to be clothes for 4 people, 2 kids and 2 adults, 1 male and 1 female. Had some food, coloring books, etc. There was a makeshift lean-to about 100 yards farther into the woods. Set up a trail camera and left it there for 3 weeks, never saw anyone. For reference, this is 35 miles from any sizable town or city. I've got one good one. I have a hunting spot that I frequent. Not crazy far off the grid or anything like that, terrain is a pain in the ass, but it's a pretty hidden spot that is close to my house. Anyway, I hunt a lot of small game there and see a ton of mule deer anytime I go out. One morning I get there about 5:30 a.m., and have some time to kill before I start my hike in. I have an odd feeling in the parking lot but just chalk it up to too much coffee on an empty stomach giving me anxiety. So, I decide to start hiking in, and about 300 yards into my hike I notice this pile of downed trees / branches / general debris that I hadn't seen before. It was my first time hunting this particular place this particular season, so I figure some folks came out and did some fire mitigation work. I don't pay too much attention to it until I notice there's an odd amount of movement coming from it. Pretty small movements, but it sticks out when a brush pile is wiggling on a still day. It was also about 5:45 a.m., and the wilderness just sort of has the stillness to it at that time that any movement is noticeable. So, I stop and start examining the pile to figure out what's going on. I figure there's a rabbit in there, maybe some squirrels. I figure I've hit the jackpot and I'm definitely about to bag something. I start deciding the best way to flush whatever is going on in there and still have my shotgun up in time to take a good shot. I realize I'm standing by a decent-sized branch, and my best move is to just stomp on the branch. If all goes according to plan, everything will freeze, then whatever is in there will dart out. I try to figure out where the rabbit will come out of, get ready, and bam, I stomp on the branch and snap it in half. The pile goes still, and that stillness and quiet is back. Then, a mountain lion, with a bloody nose and mouth, pops up out of the pile. At this point, I'm about 10 yards from the pile. I have my shotgun, but really don't want to shoot the lion. I also don't want to fire a shot off in the air to scare it, because all in all this was a pretty cool experience that very few people get to have. It froze and was looking at me very quizzically. Then, in one quick motion it hopped out of the brush pile, ran uphill, got about 40 yards from me, and disappeared into the trees. I've never seen something cover 40 yards uphill in such a fast, graceful way. One of the cooler things I've ever gotten to experience. I went to check out the brush pile when it left, and sure enough it was feasting on a mule deer. Still my favorite out in the woods story I ever tell. I work in the woods for a living and I've seen a fair amount of odd things. Carvings in trees, old beat-up cars, random weird trash scattered through the woods, and a fair amount of animal carcasses. I've had instances where I've gotten spooked. Stuff like jumping big critters is always quite jolting, but I can recall one rather butt-puckering experience. I was working with a few other people at the time, spaced out of sight but not out of earshot. I crossed over a little ridge at least 2 miles from the closest road, in the middle of the woods, and I saw what looked like a full skeleton of a cow tied together with twigs and a little bit of twine. Whoever made it had fashioned it to be sitting on a log. They left a very neat pile of bones in front of the thing, and nothing anywhere else. I saw it and about fainted. Definitely really fucking odd considering how far we were off the road, and how thick and steep it was. I ended up getting the folks I was with to come check it out, really just for shits and giggles. I took note of it and we moved on to the next plots. I have a picture, but I'm new to this whole Reddit thing so I'll try to figure out how to upload it. There is a place in Kingston, Idaho or the other side of Fernan Saddle depending on which way you go to get there. I call it the Snake Pit, and no, I don't mean the restaurant. I still visit the area now once in a while and camp there. Anyways, next to where I camp in the trees is a basin, and it has a bunch of old 1920s to 1930s rotted cars in it, overgrown by bushes and trees, but sunlight falls on the cars. First time I camped out there, I walked into those woods and the leaves all started to move. The snakes were running from me while they were sunbathing on the cars. Fucking creeped me out. I don't go in there for wood anymore and I don't see the snakes leave that spot, so I just let them be. When I was a kid, a poacher must have thought I was a deer or something and shot a round at me. It impacted on a tree above my head. I immediately fired 3 shots as fast as I could, not at the shooter but in the air. In my hunting group, immediate 3 shots means help basically. My dad and our hunting club immediately came out to find out what the fuck happened by honking the horns of their trucks letting me know they were coming. I basically laid on the ground until I could tell they were near the dirt road. Told them what happened and guessed it was probably a road poacher trying to get a deer as it came from the same road. They didn't see him. It was private property and we were always very aware of who was at what location and who was hunting where. Nobody was supposed to be in the part I was at. Scared the shit out of me. This was mid-90s. Reason why I don't like hunting on public property is cause of that, and I don't know the people out there. Not a hunter, but I go backpacking and fishing quite a bit. I have an irrational fear of bears, and waking up to bear tracks around my camp was quite unsettling, and I did not spend much more time in the area. I've also had a creepy encounter with an overly friendly deer. I was in a pretty isolated area, so I thought it was odd to see a deer that was so calm around humans. This deer would not leave me alone. It walked around my camp all day and came back at night to scare the shit out of me by laying down outside my tent. Copperheads. Bow season in KY starts early enough that you can run into a ton of them. I learned my lesson years ago to wait until at least mid-November before venturing out too deep. When I went hunting with my dad one time, we saw a homeless-looking guy carrying what looked like a torn cloth and a screwdriver on one of the trail cams. This cam was pretty deep into the woods, and it was no one we knew, so we were pretty creeped out to go back out there. I was being watched on the woods. It was the strangest feeling. I got paranoid enough that I began walking all the way to where I knew a park warden was parked. After about 100 meters, I turn around to make sure I wasn't being followed, and I see 3 bears smacking my stuff around. One bear was standing up in the middle of the access road staring right at me. Bears are terrifying. They're largely manageable with precaution, but they are uncanny. They're patient. They'll just watch, and follow. One time I was eating in a campground off a trail I was backpacking, and I was warned there were bears around. I took appropriate precautions, but it was dark as pitch out. Soon enough, a park manager rolls up and tells me he scared off a bear nearby. What was it doing? Watching me. Sitting there, behind 3 trees, just staring at my food. Who knows what would have happened if the man hadn't warned me to take extra precautions. I couldn't sleep well that night. I know I bear bagged properly, but I also know some very habituated bears can follow the scent on clothes. They're also so smart. Like, you can't trap the same bear twice the same way, because they'll outsmart the same trap the second time. I think you can guess that I don't like bears. I'm just thankful that all my local bears are black and I can scare off with loud sounds. Not a hunter, but a fly fisherman who spends every weekend out hiking remote rivers and streams in search of brown trout. I live in Montreal. My normal routine is to drive down to a river that starts in upstate New York, fish a couple kilometers of the river where no one really lives or goes. Then head cross the border and head back down to the river on the Canadian side. So I'm out there on morning by myself. I had been out there over 100 times, so it wasn't new territory by any means. That said, I was getting close to the area where other anglers had warned me about angry landowners and threats from dudes with shotguns, so I was pretty alert. I come down to the section of river there, it kinda splits, around a little island, 50x 100 kinda island, before it reconnects and the Who River veers off to the left. Most days I stay left of the island, there are few holes. This day I went right, so my view up the river was obscured until I came around the corner of the island. I get to the point, look up, and about 250 feet in front of me I'm standing there looking at a beige golden animal that's crossing the river. First thought, someone's dog. No homes. Too remote of an area. I'm standing there looking at this thing crossing the river, and the things are just racing through my head because what I'm looking at doesn't make sense for where I'm standing. This thing still hasn't seen me, it's just gingerly making its way through about 1 to 2 of water trying to cross across at a determined walk. That's when I notice the tail. I know a lot of dogs, but I've never seen a tail like. Hair on the back of my neck goes up. Fucking shit, I'm looking at a mountain lion, in upstate New York about a kilometer from the Canadian border. I take a step back behind the tree. I stood there for another few seconds watching this thing cross. When it got to the other side it bound up a washout bank up about 20 in a couple bounds. There was no doubt about what I saw. I decide I've gone far enough for the day, start making my way back to the truck, which, with the way the river bends, is pretty much in the same direction that cat was headed. Aw, fuck me. Get back in the truck, make my way home and contact New York Fish and Game. I provided some data, they say sure, we'll look into it. Most buddies who I fish with out there think I'm nuts, obviously. About a month later my parents send me a local news clip. Couple years later I come across this article, literally that area. So needless to say, I feel a little less crazy, my fellow anglers and myself exercise a little more caution in the area. I walked up on a meth lab, not sure if that is the right term, while scouting for a hunting spot. I noped the hell out of there immediately. I had never encountered such a thing before, and in hindsight the smell should have been a dead giveaway. It wasn't until I was standing there looking at what looked like a bunch of garbage under camo tarps and such that I realized what I was looking at. Edit. I walked back to where I had cell service, called the sheriff and showed him on a map where it was. Bunch of them went in, found nobody, and made me wait with another officer for over an hour by the cruisers. I'm not a hunter, but I do a lot of hiking and mountain biking in the woods. Nothing has ever made me not want to go back, but there has been some weird shit. First, there's just a lot of weird stuff in the woods. Teepees, altars, lean-tos, shrines, etc. Some of it's pretty creepy, but I think most of it is just built by bored people who are trying to make something creepy, so that makes it a bit less scary. Among the strangest of these things that I've seen are, a large clearing of trees with all but one entrance blocked off by webs of red strings and a giant stone pentagram stretched across the clearing, 30-foot diameter, a wooden tunnel leading to a small room containing defaced religious icons, Buddha statues, crucifixes, Stars of David, etc., and dozens/hundreds of creepy Polaroid pictures hanging from the ceiling. Ones I remember include a close-up face shot of a girl sleeping, a dude brushing his teeth taken from outside of the window, and a photo booth strip of two girls where one of their faces are crossed out and "I'm glad you're dead" written with one word on each picture, and a number of weird little shrines with creepy scriptures printed or scrawled into them. But what's a lot scarier to me is stuff that isn't meant to be creepy like the aforementioned things hopefully are. I once heard a distant panicked scream followed by a crashing/thudding sound. I couldn't tell from which direction it came from and I didn't hear anything else, so I have no idea what it was. I think the creepiest thing I've experienced was one time while walking home from school through the woods. I heard people talking in the distance, and I couldn't hear what they were saying, but they seemed to be arguing. They were quiet for a minute, and then I heard them again, really close now. The forest was really dense here, so although they sounded maybe 15 to 20 feet away, I couldn't see them or pinpoint exactly where they were. This time I could hear what they said. Guy 1, "It's fucked up, you guys always make me dash." Guy 2, in a hushed voice, "SHH. Someone's coming." Guy 1, now also hushed, "Shit." Guy 3, from a bit further to my left than the other guys, who sounded to be mostly right in front of me, "Hurry." Rustling noise. Guy 1, "Fuck." Guy 2, "SHH." I came around a corner and expected to see them, but I couldn't see anyone. I kept walking, cautious and trying to be aware of my surroundings. About 10 feet past the corner I saw something to the left of the trail, close to where the voices were coming from, that caught my eye. It was a bunch of stuff wrapped up in a big tarp. It wasn't completely wrapped up and you could kind of see into it. All I could see was something glass and I wanted to see what it was. I scanned the forest behind the tarp to make sure nobody was watching, and then stepped towards it. Suddenly, one of them says, "Keep walking," very calmly. I looked back into the forest but still couldn't see anyone. They said, "Go," still calm. I looked for another second, still unable to see a soul, and then turned and kept walking like nothing happened. I don't know what was going on, but the whole thing gave me the creepiest vibe I've ever gotten. Went on a camping trip maybe 10 years ago, and in the middle of the night we heard this incredibly loud smack way out on the water. Water carries sound really well, so it woke us all right the fuck up. My first thought was some drunk deranged motherfucker with a gun was shooting out over the lake, and the sound was a bullet skimming off the surface. Turns out it was a beaver that smacked the shit out of the water before diving under. It happened again in the early morning and we laughed it off, but the notion of being out in the middle of nowhere with some homicidal prick taking pot shots at you creeped me out pretty good. Didn't happen while hunting, but when I was 12 I was looking for bottles in a creek on a dense forested hillside. Hear heavy footsteps behind me. They're slow and sound heavier than a human or even a buck. I almost get paralyzed when I turn around and see two holes on a rough leathery bump. A few seconds and a heart attack later, I realized it was just the neighbor's cow that got out and its nose was a few inches from my face.